Hello, everybody. We got some really exciting stuff to cover today. So I'm not going to dilly-dally here. I'm just going to get rolling with Jon. Jon, I cannot wait for everybody to hear what you've got to talk about today, because we're diving into a really, really important, overlooked part of fertility, which is the other 50% of it, the male factor, sperm health, all things sperm. So get ready, people. We're talking about sperm. Jon, we brought in because, well, he is such a wealth of knowledge on this. I'm going to let Jon tell us all about him. And just to kind of let you guys know, a spoiler alert here, Jon has taken all of our male clients. So I think you'll be seeing a lot of Jon, and this is why. Of everything that he's going to share with us is why we've handed over this part of the practice and really, I mean, our really beloved patients and clients to Jon, because he's just so amazing at dealing with male factor, men's health, and sperm. So Jon, let's hear a little bit about you, and then we're going to dive into talking all about sperm.
Right on. Well, I'm excited to talk about sperm. So yeah, I'm trained as a physician assistant, went to Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. It's been over like a decade at this point. Practiced in addiction medicine, urgent care medicine, kind of been all over, and then transitioned over to functional medicine. And functional medicine, really the goal is to help people resolve chronic health issues and build robust health. And that transcends everything we're talking about, whether we're talking about sperm, testosterone, it's all the same thing. Is we want to get to the root cause of why there are issues, correct them at the upstream factors, and then you start to get resolution of things downstream. So that's what I love. Work with people with all sorts of chronic health issues, including helping people with fertility, and really excited just to dive into these specifics a little bit more, because what I find is the male part of the picture is underappreciated. I think women get a short end of the stick, and I think it's empowering for us to be able to understand what men can also do to help support the whole picture as far as building fertility and making the females feel supported in that process as well, so they're not doing it alone.
Amazing. And I want to point out a pretty startling statistic that you shared in an article that you just wrote about male factor infertility involvement. And that was that about 60%, around 50 to 60% of all fertility struggles have a male factor component. I mean, let's just break that down, because I don't think many people know this.
Yes, it's I don't know why it's not commonly known, but 20% is like solely a male component. So that's a pretty significant portion alone. That 2 out of 10 times it's just the man, and most of the time it's not even being talked about at all. And then there's about 30 to 40% where it's both female and male factors together. So this is why a semen analysis can be so useful, because it's going to help us further understand what factors can be in play on the male side. It's not the only thing, but it certainly is a good starting point. And it's a good barometer of overall well-being. If your semen analysis is subpar, you can rest assured that the upstream factors that affect semen production is there are things that are going to be off as well. So it's really important for us to really look at semen analysis. I find it's a great starting point for men, especially if they're a little on the fence about if there are any issues in their side. And there are several things that you really need to keep in mind when it comes to semen quality. So we know that semen quality is going to affect embryo development, right? So, a healthy embryo, a healthy baby is going to be a result of both healthy sperm and egg. But it goes beyond that too. So a lot of people don't realize that the man's genes are going to control the fetal side development of the placenta. So part of the placenta is going to be controlled by the semen, the genes within the semen. So that's something a lot of people don't realize as well. And then there are a lot of things that are involved when it comes to, semen health, obviously. And we're going to get into this a little bit more further on, but stress, diet, toxins, and things like that. But again, this is why I find that it's such low-hanging fruit to just go to your doctor, get a semen analysis, at least as a starting point to understand if there may be an issue, because a lot of times there is.
And I'll say this is where I get a lot of frustration, honestly, in working with a lot of our female clients, is that these women come to us, sometimes they're at the beginning of their trying to conceive journey, but mostly they've been at it for a while. And the women are, doing all the things, and they're feeling a lot of that stress, and they're feeling a lot of that confusion and doing all the tests. And come to find out, whether these couples are 6 months, a year, 2 years in to their journey, there's no sperm analysis yet. When we get that, we see, oh, well, yeah, here's some things that absolutely need to be addressed because they are not normal, maybe definitely not many times not optimal and not normal, which we'll talk about. And so it's a little bit, we're delaying progress, right? We're delaying
Yes.
success. And so you're saying like getting that sperm analysis right away, that semen analysis right away, understanding that malfactor is critical.
Yeah, why not?
Right. Let's have all the data right from the beginning. Right. So, and testing, I know we're going to talk about all about testing because you are I love the tests that you do for your male clients. So we're going to talk a lot about that beyond a semen analysis. But one question that I was thinking of, because I think this is quite common as well. So say if we do have a couple, they got a sperm analysis and, it's normal. So then what? Like, we're just done with that. The man's like, okay, now I'm good. It's all back on the woman. Like, what do we do then?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there's a big distinction between normal and optimal. We see this in all aspects of medicine. It's not just when it comes to reproductive health, but if you look at past, historical data, 50 years ago, normal sperm count could be 60 to 100 million per ml, whereas now you can see normal at 15 is what our doctors would tell us are normal. So we're talking about, what is that, like a 4 to 7-fold decrease and what we consider normal. So that is really significant. Same thing with motility. Normal is considered 40%, but really optimal is about 60% or more. And then morphology is considered normal at 4%. And optimal is going to be greater than 12%. So that's like a 3-fold increase. So there is a large range between normal and optimal. And I think what confuses people here is that when you see ranges that say normal, they're comparing you to the baseline of like the rest of the United States, right? So you do not want to be compared to the average person because our health in general is declining over decades. This is irrefutable, and you can see it via every metric under the sun. So we don't want to be a part of the normal population. We want to be in optimal range because optimal range means you're going to have a higher likelihood of conceiving, and that is obviously our goal here. The other thing to keep in mind is that your standard sperm analysis does not take into account potential genetic abnormalities within the sperm itself. So you can have genetic changes, some DNA fragmentation, we call it, and that can be contributing to infertility, and you would never know it because you never got a sperm DNA fragmentation test. Now, I'm not necessarily saying you should go out and get one. There are plenty of things you can do upstream to be able to correct a lot of these imbalances. But the fact is that while sperm analysis is great, it's only showing you so much of the picture, and there's a lot that we're not seeing that also needs to be taken into account.
Well, yeah, that's pretty huge. And we talk about normal versus optimal a lot in our cohorts and our curriculum. And this goes for every lab. I mean, not just fertility labs, right? I mean, we're talking about standard, basic wellness labs, things like vitamin D, thyroid, all the things, right? You have normal, but we really want to be aiming for optimal. I always say a lot of imbalances, a lot of small imbalances, all those normal labs add up to be a pretty big imbalance in the whole picture. And so you're saying the same goes for sperm.
Yeah. Yeah, when you talk about things being add up, it's like we always talk about in functional medicine, the exposome, like how much toxins are being exposed to. Like, okay, yeah, if you're exposed to like a little bit of pesticides, it's not a huge deal. But what if it's that plus these plasticizers, plus these heavy metals, like it adds up over time. And that's true for all aspects of health.
Right. And then you have borderline low vitamin D. You have a vitamin D that's 31 and you'd be deficient at 30, or maybe it's 30, you'd be deficient 29. And so you don't have that protection from those great antioxidants to really counteract a lot of these exposures, but yet it's also normal, right? So no need to dive any further.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we can see, there's a lot else that we need to figure out under the surface. And so that normal sperm analysis really is just scratching the surface of where we need to go. And so interesting about the DNA fragmentation piece. And there's a lot of really great research coming out here about miscarriage and how, in fact, recurring miscarriage many times, I might be even confident enough to say that most of the time, I think it might be over 50%, but I'm not sure. I'd have to get that study, is contributed to some of the sperm DNA fragmentation issues. And so just another reason why getting that full picture is so important. So when you're working with men to support their health, improve their fertility, you're talking about, okay, let's get that sperm analysis. Say you have that with you, but where else do you begin? I mean, where are you looking at this whole picture in that functional sense with this person?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you probably already saw in the fertility library, we talk about some of the basics of nutrition and lifestyle changes that can affect fertility on the men's side of the equation. But really what you want to do, I find there are two big starting points with really anybody. But what it looks like is number one is you need to recognize you're a category of one, that you are a unique person. You have a unique lifestyle, upbringing, environment, genetics, nutrition. All these things are going to influence your current level of well-being, right? So this is why when you have a cookie cutter plan, it's not going to be nearly as effective as something that is individualized to you. And I'll give you like some simple examples so you understand what I mean by this. I've worked with two people before who were diabetic, many diabetes, but I'll give you two examples. So one, pretty much changed up some nutritional factors, make sure he started exercising regularly, getting good quality sleep. Blood sugars went from diabetic range into normal range within several months, whereas we had another person doing a very similar process and numbers weren't budging. This person's doctors were like, hey, this must be a genetic thing. You need to go on insulin. And the reason why blood sugar is important is obviously when we talk about uh, fertility and sperm health, blood sugar is one of those big issues that can affect it. This person, we found out that his issue wasn't necessarily the nutrition. He was actually eating extremely cleanly. He was working out a lot. It was he was getting some serious environmental toxin exposure that was never diagnosed, percolate and some other environmental toxins. He never would have gotten better if we didn't understand that that's what was going on, if we didn't assess for those things. Doctors would just escalated the increase in medication, and he was just going to be on medication the rest of his life. The other thing to consider from a fertility perspective, though, is that those upstream imbalances, those toxin exposures would have continued to have been there if we had never identified it. So, yes, you could have corrected those blood sugars taking medication. You weren't going to correct that toxin exposure, and you better believe that that could have very well affected fertility. So that's pretty
Can I say
significant, right?
I love this example, and this reminds me of this wonderful imagery of kind of a splinter in your foot, right? So if you're walking around, you got a splinter in your foot, and you are just feeling that pain, then you're good can be doing all the things on top to address that pain, right? You can be taking a pain medication, or you can be trying to take it easy or rest. But if you don't actually take the splinter out, then you're not actually going to be addressing the issue. And so I feel like that's a perfect splinter analogy of we need to actually see what is contributing, and then let's like make sense to address that, right?
Yes,
And I
yes.
love that. I love that. And then another thing that's really kind of, I think, would hit home for a lot of people, women listening to this on their fertility journey, trying to learn more about the male factor, men listening to this, trying to really bring in their side of it, is the point of the customization here, Jon. It's like there's so much information on social media, right? Social media, take this supplement, do this, eat, don't eat this. And I think a lot of people get burnt out because they do all these things. It may be well-meaning, but it's not actually for them, right? So yeah, it's where would you say? I mean, I think you've already answered it about how you address that, but do you see that a lot in people you work with too? Just kind of the burnout of trying all the things.
Yeah, it's extremely common. And the thing that I always tell people is like if you're just always following like random people for advice, like how do you know who to believe and how do you know how long to try something out? It makes it very difficult. And that's because a lot of times people are very disease centered, and even like with fertility, you can say like they're very fertility centered, which is it's good to a sense. But what I like to do is look at things from a more broad systems perspective. So what that means is looking at like the upstream factors that affect fertility. So like a lot of people will go to like let's look at hormones, look at testosterone, thyroid, things like that. And those are good too. But you want to go even higher than that. What actually affects thyroid health, testosterone health, sperm production? So for me, there are six main areas that you want to assess and address. Number one is going to be your nutritional imbalances. This is one of the more obvious ones. This could be things like your minerals, your zinc, selenium, magnesium. It could be things like your vitamins, B12, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E. Could be your omega-3s, which are really important. And then there's like the more other factors like obesity, diabetes, and things like that. So nutritional balance is number one. Number two
And
is
those,
stress.
sorry to interrupt
Go
you,
ahead.
Jon, but those are all directly correlated to sperm health, right? I mean,
Yep,
all of those, like
100%.
directly associated with the sperm health that we're looking for. And one thing about, I love how you're talking about diabetes, obesity, and we don't have to go, this could be a whole thing on its own, but addressing people and like finding if someone's like, oh, I'm not diabetic, like my A1C is with fine. You know, I see that on my annual and it's fine. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that you help people to actually understand that and what better labs to get for that. And we don't have to go too
Yeah.
far into it, but this is big. This is a big one.
I was gonna get into this a little later, but we'll dive in
Oh,
now.
okay, well you
So
can delay it then. Sorry to interrupt you. You keep going.
it's a we'll dive in. So with blood sugar, you know, the A1C is an average of like 3 to 4 month span. It's a decent marker, but there are some imperfections to it because of that. So generally, what I like to do is use like a continuous glucose monitor, so get better data. So if you're somebody who is like borderline, like say your A1C is like 5.6 and pre-diabetes is 5.7, or you were in the pre-diabetic range but not diabetic range, a continuous glucose monitor to me is great because it gives you a 24/7 look at your blood sugar for 14 days. And not only does it show you what your average is, but it shows you really like if you have significant spikes that you shouldn't be having, if you have significant dips. And what I also like is it really helps you dial in. It gives you accountability. Like you can actually see objectively what's working, what's not working. And when you see your blood sugar really spike a lot, you're going to think twice about making poor choices. So it's not only good for just like educational purposes, but it's also good for accountability.
I love that. Love it.
Yeah.
All right, so
So yeah,
nutritional imbalances as number one. Thank you for outlining those and going through those. So what do we be thinking about next here?
number two is stressors. And this is, I think, especially with men, they don't like to use the word stress. So you can use the word busy maybe, but yeah, stress. And stress could be psychological, could be past trauma. It could be overactivity. If you're working out too much, that can actually be one. I've had a guy who came to me and he was having significant fatigue. Testosterone was in the tanks. Had been to numerous functional medicine doctors, was put on testosterone replacement therapy. Obviously, not what you'd want to do for fertility perspective. But one thing he did that it worked initially was he was doing cold plunges. And while they would give him like a nice increase in energy for a period of time, and then after a few months, it started to not help, and then it started to actually hurt him. He was like feeling depleted. And that's because cold plunges, while they're very popular now, are a sympathetic stimulant. It is stimulating that fight or flight response. So while some people can handle that, other people it is going to be a big drain on them. So yeah, sympathetic stimulation, too much stress, whether it's physical, psychological, can affect it. And there's what we call, and Liv, I know you know this, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, right? So we're talking about an axis from our brain that's very much in response to stress that directly affects our gonads and the production of testosterone and sperm. So you definitely want to be very careful with stress. Um, Number three would be immune issues. So is there an autoimmune part of the equation? Food sensitivities, things like that, because these things are going to create inflammation or oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is another word for free radical damage, and that free radical damage could be damaging sperm. So we definitely want to be very careful with that.
And I feel like this is a big area that testing is so important in. And I think we'll get into testing later. But I mean, is that true? Like, I think a lot of people, when they hear immune, they're like, okay, food sensitivities. I don't necessarily like feel anything when I eat stuff and autoimmunity, right? I mean, I think testing is just gold here. Test, don't guess.
Yeah, yeah. And it depends on the person. Like not everybody has to do all the things and all the testing. This is where I think the personalization is really important to understand where the person is coming from in that context. And then yes, you go, okay, what is appropriate testing for this type of person? So yeah,
Love that.
100%.
Amazing.
Number four in here is toxins. So again, there's many ways that you can be exposed. And so I don't want to freak everybody out because to some extent we are going to be exposed. There was a study, I think it was in the 2000s, where they looked at placental blood in pregnant women. They found that they had like 90 plus toxins like circulating in the blood at any one time. So like there is significant exposure that's happening. You're never going to completely remove that, but our goal is to find the heavy hitters. So we start looking for things like your heavy metal exposure. What is your exposure to plastics because they act like synthetic estrogen within the body, and even pesticides. So those are some big ones. Medications are sneaky. But certain medications can affect testosterone or sperm production. So steroids are a big one, but certain antidepressants as well. And I know it's a common one for many people. A lot of people are on antidepressants, so you need to be careful there. And then the obvious ones that we know, but people are resistant to, of course, are going to be more of like the drugs, right? The alcohol, marijuana, opioids, nicotine, all can affect fertility. And it's pretty unequivocal that they are going to some extent. So you definitely want to be careful with those. And again, it's not to say like you should never have a drink ever, but you definitely be careful with the volume that you're taking in.
Amazing. Wow. So
Yeah.
much there. And
And
then
then
yeah, keep on. I love this. Let's just, this is such great information, and let's finish it out here. What else we got?
number five here is microbes. So this could be infections. So the guy that I gave you the example where he was really fatigued and was getting wrecked by the cold baths, his main issue was mold. It was a mold exposure that was causing it. So this is not super common, but it is there. So there you want to be careful about potential infections. And then one other thing that could be even more mild is just dysbiosis, an imbalance between your good and bad bacteria. And Liv, I know you know a ton about gut health. If you have a high beta-glucuronidase, which is produced by dysbiosis, it is going to affect detoxification. It'll increase your reabsorption of estrogen, so it's kind of hard to detoxify from estrogen. So yeah, your gut health and microbes can certainly affect hormones, and people don't recognize there's a connection, but there are some clear, like straightforward ones like that.
And this is just a testament to the systems approach, John, right? I mean, so you're looking at this when you see someone come in and they, you're reading their intake, you're looking at their story, their history, you're taking on all of it, like you're understanding all of this in their picture, right? So you're helping them
Yes,
to clarify, okay, this is something that's pretty significant. We need to dive into here, figuring out of all of this list, where do we put our energy, right? So that we're not spinning our wheels and just doing all the things that the internet tells us to do, right?
exactly. Exactly.
Amazing,
Yeah.
because I know
And
that, yeah.
it sobers you. Like it allows you, it gives you a framework where you can look at things and go, yes, this is what I need to address, and these things are actually okay. But unless you know how to comprehensively assess these things, it begins to get overwhelming. And then that's when you get thrown around by every new research, every new study, every new post. Whereas you can look at a study and go, you know what, this doesn't actually apply to me right now. Like I know this area of my life is fine, and you can chill. And being calm going through a fertility journey is important.
But you're saying also that people don't have to have a graveyard of supplements in their kitchen? Like, what if, they're just buying all the supplements that they see recommended to them? You're actually going to
Yeah.
help them to figure out what they need and don't need?
You can save a lot of money this way by going, you know what? We don't actually need to take like half of these things. We can get them through food. If you're in an optimal range, taking more is not going to help, and it can end up adversely affecting you. If zinc's great for testosterone production, but taking too much, you can start dropping out copper, which is another problem. So yeah, you have to be very careful about just like blindly supplementing. I find that's a subpar approach for sure.
Huge.
And then that brings us to number six, and that's lifestyle environmental factors. So this could be things like your physical activity, even when we talk about sperm production, heat, are we sitting in hot tubs a lot? Circadian rhythm and sleep is huge. So what's your sun exposure? What's your sleep quality like? Because man, everything is affected by sleep. So if you have poor sleep, it's going to affect hormones, weight,
Mhm.
blood sugar, which again, downstream is going to affect sperm production and quality. And then a weird one, which is a little more fringe, is like electromagnetic frequencies, but there is some good data on this that people who are exposed like to the highest levels of radio frequencies have significantly lower fertility rates. So it's just something that you don't want to go crazy with, but you definitely want to be aware of like, hey, maybe I probably shouldn't be carrying my phone that's on in my pocket right next to my genitals. So
Makes sense to
that's
me. Yeah, I'm making sure. Another big one I have people look at is, where is your internet router in your house? Is this right next to your bedroom? Is this right next to your head when you're sleeping, right next through the wall where you're sleeping, and you're exposed to that for 10 hours a night, right? So I love that you added this, because it is, to me, it's a low-hanging fruit question to ask. Okay, let's just see what the greatest sources of these are, and it's a pretty easy solution to just mitigate that, make a small
yes.
change for a potentially huge reward.
Yes, 100%. And this brings me to the second piece of the puzzle. So one, we want to recognize your category one. Two, here we want to make sure we're quantifying properly. So talking about proper testing, right? So you can actually use devices and test for like electromagnetic frequencies, but again, it's probably easier to just say, hey, we're gonna like move the router, we'll turn it off at nighttime. I'm gonna put my phone on airplane mode when I'm carrying it on me, things like that. But when we talk about quantification, this could mean a few things. It could mean getting the right proper labs. So when we were talking about nutritional factors, for instance, like actually testing for your zinc and selenium, magnesium levels, like getting those omega-3s is really important, that both men and women. And the reason why it's important is you just don't know what you need. You might be eating, say, like salmon twice a week and taking a fish oil, and you're like, hey, I'm doing great with my omega-3s. And then you test and you're still only 5.5% and your optimal is 8 to 10%. So it helps you understand, like, are you doing the right things and are you doing enough of the right things? So I find that's really important. Testing could also be, gut hormones, toxin detoxification markers, food sensitivities. There's a whole litany of things. It just depends again on what you specifically need. Most people are going to benefit from some of the basics, nutritional testing, and things like that, hormones. It could be devices like we talked about, a continuous glucose monitor. It could be, tracking your sleep using like an Oura ring to see like what your sleep quality is like. It could be tracking just simple things like your food intake and just it's as simple as that. Like, hey, I'm gonna go and put it on a tracker for a week just to see what I'm taking in. Like, am I being fed enough? Are there deficiencies? Like, you can just see right away, like, hey, I'm not getting enough folate in my diet. Like every day, my folate is low. So tracking a week will just allow you to understand where your holes are and then where you can correct them. And the reason why I find tracking so useful, there's several reasons. Number one, it allows you to be more targeted in your approach, which we were talking about before.
Mhm.
When you know you are deficient in something, you know what you need to do to correct it. And you can also track progress along the way. Say, hey, my omega-3s were 5.5. I'm going to make these changes. I'm going to increase my intake of like the smash fish, the high omega-3, low mercury fish. And then I'm going to retest in, say, like 3 months because that test is based on red blood cells. Red blood cell is 3 to 4 month lifespan. So you want to give it at least that much time for a change. And then you can see your progress. I find that also that helps with compliance because if you just are going by some things you see online on social media, how long are you going to stick with it if you don't notice subjectively any improvement? If you start taking zinc, if you start taking omega-3s, if you start doing certain things and you're like, I know this is supposed to help me, but I don't feel any different. Should I continue on this? Should I stop? You don't know. But when you have the data, it objectively shows you what you need, and then you can track progress along the way to make sure that you know what you're doing is actually having the intended effect that you're looking for. And then finally, the one thing we talk about with like continuous glucose monitors, for instance, is effectiveness, right? Like I know that if this blood sugar is fluctuating, I can see objectively when I make this change, it is dropped my blood sugar. The average is much more accurate or much more in a normal range. So in general, like the quantification is a big piece. And I find, especially with men, like men love data, like they're very cerebral in general. So, like, if you're having trouble getting a man on board, a lot of times it's because it's more of like an emotional argument. Whereas if we make it more data driven and you go, hey, dude, like your sperm analysis is subpar. Your zinc is in the tanks. Like your omega-3s is not very good. Here's the data that shows how these things affect testosterone production and sperm production. I think that's a much more strong argument for somebody who is more cerebral and logic oriented.
Absolutely. And the fact that you can retest and show progress. I mean, that's so amazing to be able to actually see that what you're doing, what you're putting your precious energy into and time into is actually paying off and making a difference.
100%. Because if the only metric is like pregnant, not pregnant, that's hard. That's hard
Yeah.
because you're like, I don't know. But if it's like, hey, we made these changes in these markers, then it shows you that what you're doing is helping. The one thing I would also say here, um, because I know a lot of times with getting men on board can be difficult, is these are things that are not just going to affect sperm, right? It's affecting your overall health and well-being. That means, generally you're going to look better, you're going to have more energy, you're going to think more clearly. And when you do get pregnant and do have children, that is going to translate over to you being a better parent, a better father. It's also going to mean you're going to have the foundation to be able to help your children thrive, right? Because like your most lessons in life are taught, not taught. Your children are not going to learn a lot by what you say. They're going to look at you and they're going to follow what you do. So if you're eating unhealthy, you better believe it's going to translate over. If you're taking care of yourself, you better believe like they're going to pick up on it. Like when I go and work out, and my girls like come down the basement and see me, they join in the working out process, right? So like that's the thing that we want to understand is this is number one about fertility and conception, but it's also about beyond that point. How is it improving our quality of life and that of our children?
And that's what I love so much about the approach that you take, John, is it that whole systems functional approach. It's not just about today, it's about tomorrow. It's about understanding the tools that this generation can have to not only help our health, but really pass that down, right? Transgenerational health. It's really, yes, showing that model for our children, but then also literally impacting their health, right? Their genetics too. This is your fertility, your future. I don't know if you guys have taken a look around, but health statistics are not really something that America has to boast about. Our children's health is suffering, and so many of the changes that we are making now. Yes, we want to get pregnant. We want to stay pregnant. We want to feel our best selves, but also it's about shifting that generation's health in a positive direction going forward too.
And it takes both people to be on board. Yeah, it is very difficult if one person is on board and the other one is not, because again, the kids will pick up on this and then they kind of start pitting each other against each other. So having a united front is important, and getting started prior to is way easier than after the fact. When you have a child, when you have multiple kids, you're busy. Like, you have a plan. You're like, hey, like, our kids are gonna have like the cleanest meals, and we're never gonna deviate. And then you have a kid, and you're like, okay, we're gonna be a little more flexible here. But if you're trying to figure all this stuff out when you have kids, it's harder. You just have less time. You have less bandwidth. So I find it's easier to get that foundation in prior to. And like, I didn't even bring this up, but like, I have three little girls under 6, and we were lucky enough that like I had understood these things prior to that point. Like, I'd already been in functional medicine and practicing. Like, I understood what it took to be able to like prep properly. So we didn't have a lot of issues, thankfully. I know you still can, but that was the point, is like, when you have the information, when you make the changes, the whole process becomes a whole lot easier, and I find it becomes a lot more effective. And again, it's going to translate over into everything else, into when you're raising your kids, and then just your overall health in general.
Very powerful. So I think a great question to maybe end on, we'll see. Maybe we'll think of something else when we go. But a question that I would love to hear your insight on is, when is a good time to begin this, right? Someone's on a trying to conceive journey. They want to take the steps to, identify their upstream imbalances, root cause, maybe get some labs and bring targeted support for their fertility. When is a good time to begin that?
What's I'm not sure if it's like a Buddhist saying or something, where it's like, when's the best time to plant a tree? It was like 10 years ago, but the second best time is now.
Love it.
Yeah, I would say it's that. It's, spermatogenesis takes about 2 months prior. So you want to make sure that at the very, very minimum, you want to give yourself at least that. But generally, for couples that have been trying to conceive for beyond 6 months, like, you really want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to improve the fertility picture, and then also just quality, right? Again, because it's not just about getting pregnant, but it's about making sure that sperm and the egg are healthy. And if the sperm does have DNA fragmentation to a certain extent, it does have genetic abnormalities, like, it is going to translate over into potentially affecting the pregnancy, whether it's miscarriage, whether it's the health of the embryo and the fetus, whether it's the placental development. So yeah, for me, it's always like, as soon as possible, you want to make sure you're getting this done, because you do have that 2-month lag, so you don't want to wait.
And what about IVF? Or someone's like, well, I'm going to do IVF, so don't really have to worry about this.
It's a good question. So IVF is very interesting. I mean, if that's the route you want to go, it's totally fine. But what I would say here is, even if that's the case, you are going to increase your likelihood of success with IVF if you have better sperm quality, if you have better, maybe not so much so much about the volume, but certainly like motility, morphology. Like, it's going to be important that you have that. And again, there are the things that you cannot, or that you're probably not testing for, like DNA fragmentation, that even if you have a doctor go in and they're choosing the specific sperm, they're not going to be able to see the genetic fragmentations that are happening. So again, you want to make sure that you are optimizing for that sperm quality, even if IVF is going to be like your go-to, either now or in the future.
Yeah. Amazing. I think that's so helpful for people to hear, and understanding that really any way that you're trying to conceive journey may go, it's very powerful to be understanding this information now, for whether you want or need IVF in the future or don't need it in the future. It's just a really, really powerful changes to be addressing here. So anything else that you wanted to add, Jon, before? I think you're going to share, about some options for people to get in touch with you below, or you could talk about it here, but anything else that you want to close out with?
That's a good question. I mean, the biggest thing I would say here is what I said before is just, it takes two, and I think it's important to everybody to just be on the same page. And, it's not what we see in our society is, oh, this is really just kind of about the female for the most part, and the men give the sperm, but really it's the female. And what we see statistically, we look at the data, it's pretty much equal. It's both men and women. Sperm health is extremely important for a multitude of factors, whether it's for pregnancy, but also the health of the embryo, the health of placenta. So really making sure that you're a united front, that you guys are making and supporting changes together. I could really not think of anything better, because again, it is going to translate over into when you do have a child, setting that foundation, setting that united front is immeasurable.
Well, I think you're very ahead of the science here, honestly. I mean, I think the science is coming out. We know that testosterone, we know that male fertility is on the decline. And I think what you're doing, Jon, is really a very proactive and ahead of the curve approach, because I think my theory is that in a decade plus, we're going to be at a really hard spot in our health as a population overall, right? And we were headed that way, but especially in fertility, for men's health, there's just going to be this huge, seemingly like overnight spotlight on it. And we can say, actually, yeah, we've been on this for years, and it's something that we've been helping people well beforehand. So it's just really powerful to be able to kind of see that in the data now and bring that to the attention of couples trying to conceive and bring that support. So just really awesome what you're doing. And so if people really want to get in touch with you and learn more, where would you point them to make that happen?
So yeah, there are two options that are available. So number one is we can do a discovery call. So the discovery call is a free call where we get on and I just hear more about what you've been doing so far, what your challenges are, and then we can see if we're a good fit. And then generally the next step is we do a strategy session. So a strategy session is we get some labs beforehand to better quantify, any imbalances that we discussed that are in play. And then we get on a 60-minute call and we can review your case in its entirety and really start to put the puzzle pieces together to give you some clear guidance on what changes that could be made. And then we'll be able to support you and make those changes.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jon. I know people are going to find such tremendous value in this, and I cannot wait to get people in touch with you if they wish. So we'll put all that information here below.
Right on. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to hearing from you guys.